For Family by Nunuk888. Chapter 16. The Price of Power. "Do, Chewie," Han grumbled as they followed the ensign through uninspiring gray corridor after uninspiring gray corridor. "Not 200, not 2,000. Do." He closed his mouth, raising his head in his best impression of a haughty Imperial as a patrol of stormtroopers approached. He ducked his head again as soon as they had passed. "And somehow, we managed to end up traipsing through both of them." Chewie woofed a non-committal sound, knowing that his loquacious friend was only venting from worry. No matter how much he disliked the Death Star, they wouldn't have chosen to be anywhere else. Han snapped straight back as the ensign turned to them. "This will take us up to the command sector, sir," the young man reported as he tapped the console to summon the elevator. Han nodded as loftily as he could. "Good." He looked at the ensign, then Chewie, the next two, then the ensign again. Unaccustomed to standing still, Han shifted from foot to foot, looking all around, trying to find something to say to fill the awkward silence as they waited for the elevator to arrive. X2 pulled off that air of attentive ease that all military men seemed to possess just as easily as the ensign, and Chewie and the other 8 rebel troops imitated to varying degrees of success. Han, on the other hand, continued to rock on his heels, fidgeting in the stiff black uniform. Just as Han had been about to break under the uncomfortable silence and start grilling the ensign over what could have possibly enticed him to sign up with the Imperial Academy, red lights began flashing in the corridor and a mechanical voice sounded through the intercom. "Priority alert, Rebel fleet in attack range, priority alert." "Rebel attack!" the ensign cried, turning several shades whiter. "Flaming hot slime, not a rebel attack!" Han exclaimed with grossly exaggerated gravity. "We'd best get to the command sector, quick!" The ensign nodded eagerly, entirely serious. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a cloaked woman. Several strands of red hair had escaped the confines of the hood, framing bright green eyes as they widened in recognition. "You!" she hissed. Not a moment later, everyone's blasters had been drawn. Han had never seen the woman before, but with Chewie in battle mode, there was no question in his mind that this wasn't bad news. He aimed his blaster at her and improvised. "Freeze, you rebel scum!" The rest of his squad followed his lead and also pointed their weapons at her. "I am Imperial!" she snapped. "You're the rebel scum! You're Han Solo and this is Chewbacca! Everyone's heard of you!" The ensign had also drawn his blaster, but he was wavering between the two, not knowing who to aim at. Han barked a laugh and retorted, "We're Lord Vader's agents. Not every Wookiee you see is the infamous Chewbacca." "Oh, that's Chewbacca, all right, with his trademark bowcaster. I spent a month undercover with you social misfits. I know!" "Oh, yeah, of course. Undercover." Han jeered. "What a load of garbage, you're no Imperial." Mara couldn't widely publicize her identity as the Emperor's hand, but she could still verify her allegiance. She smiled gloatingly over her blaster. "We'll ask the Emperor to clear up who's lying, shall we?" Han scoffed with false bluster, but inside he realized that any hope of wrangling their way out of this complication had all but disappeared. The redhead reached for her comlink. Han abruptly fired at her, forcing her to dive out of the way. Chewie clobbered the unfortunate ensign over the head, knocking him to the floor in a daze. It saved his life. Not a moment later, the spot where he'd been standing was filled with a volley of laser fire as stormtroopers came charging in with blasters blazing. "Run!" Han shouted as the rebels peeled down the corridor, firing wildly back over their shoulders. The massive Imperial Armada surrounded the entire rebel fleet. The multitude of Star Destroyers wasted no time in closing in for the kill, sailing straight for the trapped rebels. Akbar quickly scanned the computer readout of the field. "All ships hold course. Focus on 2 sections headed by Liberty and Defiance. Find a way through." The rebels held their breath as they flew at the surging wall of Imperial ships. They clashed. It was instant chaos. Imperial and Alliance capital ships pounding each other with their guns as thousands of TIE fighters and hundreds of rebel starfighters hurtled in between. "There's too many of them!" Tulsage cried. Visibility was down to mere meters as their ships screamed through a roiling sea of ships and lethal fire. The rebel starfighters were outnumbered 5-1, and those TIE fighters not involved in dogfights began targeting the Alliance warships. "Accelerate to attack speed," the Grey Leader ordered. "Engage the TIEs and draw their fire away from the cruisers." There was no time to think. Sweeping along the hulls of the Alliance battleships, firing at whatever TIE fighters they could locate in their targeting arrays, and dodging the deadly blasts from the increasing number of TIEs they were picking up on their tails, the rebel pilots reacted on instinct as they charged and dodged and spun through the intense melee. And all around them were frequent explosions, but the battle was too frenzied to see which side had gone up in flames. Angry clouds of darkness rolled before him in waves. This was the essence of Darth Vader that she had known and feared all the years of her life, that even those with no sensitivity to the Force experienced as a sense of severe dread at being in his presence. It was only then, in its shocking return, that she noticed its previous absence on Polis Massa and Geonosis. Even as far back as during the treaty talks on Theed, Darth Vader had not been Darth Vader like this. But what did it mean? Had it truly been Anakin Skywalker who had helped him, as Luke had thought? Had Vader now returned in his most terrifying form? "You're here. I'm so pleased," Palpatine snarled, sounding anything but. Vader strode over the bridge, spanning the seemingly endless drop to the reactor core and onwards across the polished floor, his step unhurried but purposeful. "I'm sure you are," came his biting reply. "You were so concerned at the thought of my demise that I felt duty-bound to reassure you otherwise without delay." Palpatine tried to penetrate that helmeted head, only to be met with an impeccable wall of shields. His gaze narrowed. How uncharacteristic of Vader to have been meditating and working on his technique. "You're reckless to come to me, Lord Vader. Did you not learn your lesson the last time you were screaming on your knees before me?" Leia searched the black mask. What had happened between them? Anakin smiled secretly to himself as he climbed the first set of stairs to the throne. He had learned his lesson all right, but it wasn't for Sidious to know just what that lesson had been. However intoxicating the darkness, his family triumphed. "It was but a small price to pay," Vader drawled. He continued without pause to the top of the second set of stairs and then took a step to the side, placing himself directly in Palpatine and Leia's line of sight. He held himself at his full height, offering no bow. "I would have done anything to keep my son from you, Sidious." If there had been any doubt before of Vader's intent to terminate his apprenticeship to the Sith Master, it was certainly banished now. Amidst Leia's growing suspicions of what might have transpired following the rebels' escape from Yavin 13, there was a gentle touch against her mind. It originated from within the dark cloud surrounding Vader, but it wasn't intrusive. Nothing more than a nudge, really, as if he just leaned into her shoulder. Even in its brief contact, she recognized the gesture for what it was. Reassurance. "It's still me," he was saying. "I'm here." She might have rejected him. She might have coldly rebutted his apologies. But he was still here, placing himself in harm's way to protect her. A lump formed in her throat. "The princess will leave now," Vader stated. "I can't," Leia began to explain, but Sidious interrupted. "So formal." Sidious shook his head sadly. Mara Jade hadn't returned with the blood analysis yet. That was the one drawback of removing all data regarding midichlorians off the public archives, that it took the medics far longer than it used to run tests they didn't know and confirm results they didn't understand. But it wasn't exactly a wild stab in the dark. He taunted with mock pity. "You poor thing, has your own daughter denied you the use of her name?" Vader's Force presence twitched at this confirmation that Sidious knew exactly who she was. Bloodless lips stretched over blackened teeth. "There is no hurry. The princess and I were having such an informative conversation. I'd hate for her to leave so soon." The helmet turned fractionally. "Go," he said over his shoulder. "Oh, that really is inconsiderate, Lord Vader. We didn't even get to speak of her dear mother." Time stopped. "You haven't told her, have you? I didn't think so." Vader's guilt swirled all about them. "Go, Leia," he urged again. That was all the confirmation she needed. Something had happened. No, he had done something to her mother, and he didn't want her to know. Her feet seemed glued to the black floor.
I can see you, my dear, thanks to Lord Vader standing so very rudely in front of you,
came Palpatine's voice.
But fortunately, we can still speak around him. Your mother was a dear friend and colleague of mine for many years, and I share your grief. You have no right to speak of her,
Vader thundered.
I know how you like to bury any thought of your late wife, Lord Vader, but it is therapeutic to speak of distressing matters, and you can't deny that this is certainly distressing. Even the mere mention of Padme's name has you bristling like an agitated lackey.
He smiled darkly at Vader, fuming silently.
It was a sad day for all of us when she died.
You're incapable of any normal human emotions, Sidious. There is only darkness and evil inside you.
Palpatine was amused at Vader's attempt to steer the subject away.
You're no different, my friend. Why else would you choke your pregnant wife to death?
Inside his mask, Anakin closed his eyes. Now Leia knew, and under the worst possible circumstances, he could feel her horrified gaze burning into the back of his skull. Just when he thought that there couldn't be anything left of his heart to hurt anymore, it broke even more. The pain and guilt flowed off Vader as if his cape was a physical manifestation of it. Was there no end to Vader's atrocities against those he called his family? Leia unconsciously backed away from him. Anakin sensed her motion, and his resolve to protect her reasserted itself within him. So long as she was headed in the right direction, away from Sidious, he would use it as leverage. He stepped backwards, forcing her to take another step. She had reached the top of the stairs. Palpatine wasn't blind.
Princess Leia is going nowhere, he snapped, rising from his throne. She is denounced you firmly and repeatedly. She stays here.
She may denounce me as much as she wishes,
Vader threw back.
Neither of us has a claim to her. The choice for her future is hers alone.
Sidious circled them.
I already gave her the option to leave, Lord Vader, and she refused it.
Because you threatened to destroy Naboo, Leia snapped. Vader's countenance darkened as he flicked his lightsaber off his belt.
Then the threat must be removed. Permanently.
Vader's grin was pure malice.
I thought you'd never try.
His lightsaber shooting into hand was the work of a moment, and the Sith Master flew at Vader, knowing he would be blocked. He wasn't disappointed. With a resonant snap hiss, the matching red blade leapt to life, and they clashed in a shower of sparks. So I finally get to meet the famous Mara Jade, and on the Death Star. Han hollered sardonically as he stuck his arm around the corner and fired down the corridor without looking. Perfect! And I finally get to meet the stuck-up, half-witted nerf herder Han Solo! She shouted back, accompanying her response with her own hail of blaster fire. Hey! Han complained, firing back again along with the other rebels. You don't even know me. I don't need to know you. Your blasted friends went on and on. Every day it was Han this, Han that. It was nauseating. Han quirked a grin at Chewie standing above him.
You did? Sweet. Then we mentioned you once or twice. That hardly qualifies as going on and on, Chewie corrected before firing his bowcaster at a stormtrooper who had been trying to keep closer. They were in a great corridor that looked identical to the countless others they had ran through, holding ground as they waited for X2 to hotfire the door behind them. They maintained a stream of blaster fire around the corner, and they could hold back a few stormtroopers at a time, but if the imps rallied their numbers and stormed them before they could get the door open, it would all be over. 2 corners away further down the corridor, Mara Jade turned impatiently to the ensign. The man was ashen and seemed a little shaken, but was otherwise back on his feet. How can it take so long for reinforcements to arrive? She demanded tightly. The Death Star was filled to the brim with stormtroopers, and yet there had been no sign of backup since the first 2 squads had arrived. Commander Jujarot assured they would be here, the young man insisted, repeating his comlink conversation. Mara weighed the importance of pursuing the rebels against the test results secured in our pocket and made her decision. Hold them here until backup arrives, then rush them.
she ordered the stormtroopers. "Try and take them alive, but kill them rather than letting them escape. I'll be back." One of the squad leaders nodded curtly at her and resumed firing down the corridor as she hurried away. X2 was still working on the door when it whooshed open of its own accord. A uniformed officer stepped through, completely oblivious to the group huddled on the other side. He had all of one shocking moment to register their presence before X2 had knocked him unconscious. 2 TIE fighters clipped their wing braces directly in front of his A-wing interceptor. One of them came spinning towards him, and Jake Farrell tilted his controls minutely to evade it by flying straight through the dispersing fireball of the other. Tenna matched his flight pattern and stuck close by his wing. They emerged from the fireball, only to pull up sharply to narrowly miss a lone A-wing that came zooming past. 2 TIE interceptors screamed after it in hot pursuit, laser cannons blasting. "Blue 7, you've got 2 on your tail," Farrell warned as he dove after them. "You think I hadn't noticed?" Thurn grumbled as he swung his ship from side to side, trying to escape them in an erratic path through the swarm of starfighters. "Blue leader, Blue 7's flying solo," Farrell added. He had instructed countless new recruits. How many times had he drilled into them that nobody flew alone? "Copy, Green 6, Sims acknowledged, equally unimpressed. "I'm on my way." The lone A-wing ducked behind the bridge of the Star Destroyer. Thunder flared, zipping around its protruding sensors and antennae, but the pursuers continued to stick right behind it. "I can't shake them," Thurn called. "Hold on, we're almost there," Farrell said as he and Num closed in. A flight of 3 TIEs came barreling towards them through the thick mass of starfighters and battleships. Normally, Farrell would have just dodged them and continued to hunt down the interceptors, but these weren't normal TIEs! Their triple arrow-shaped solar wings spelled trouble. These had shielding, enhanced firepower, advanced maneuverability that outstripped the A-wing and were flown by the most elite and experienced of the interceptor pilots. Farrell swore. "Sorry, we have to break off. They've got defenders!" He and Num plunged into a tight corkscrew over the Retaliator's hull, unleashing laser cannons as they shot past the 3 TIE defenders, all the while evading the booming ion pulses the Retaliator was firing at the Maria. As feared, the triple-winged TIEs simply absorbed the laser blasts with their shielding and hurtled after them. Farrell's computer flashed in warning concussion missiles had locked onto him. Refusing to take his wingman down with him, he broke free from Nub against his own instructions and shot straight for the Denunciator's shield generator alone. He looped around it as tight as he dared, pushing his speed faster, tighter. He snatched at his controls. He pulled away just as the shield generator exploded behind him. The A-wing buckled from the shockwave, but fortunately soon steadied. Town Num caught up with him again, and they circled the next warship in the never-ending scattergram of Star Destroyers. Thurn, meanwhile, had spotted a narrow gap between 2 converging squadrons of TIE bombers and nosedived his A-wing through it. Shara spotted the A-wing come hurtling out of the dense mesh of bombers on the other side. She was already firing at its tail in anticipation. Sure enough, the pursuing interceptors flew into her line of fire and exploded into 1,000 pieces. "Thanks, Crew 5, Thurn called. Shara simply grinned as she flew off with her wingman, already firing at more TIE fighters. "Blue 7, you're with us," Sims snapped as he sped past with his wingman. "Copy, Blue Leader," Thurn acknowledged in relief as he hurriedly joined their formation.
"Run, Leia."
Leia jumped at the voice in her head. Lightsabers lunged and parried at such a speed that made it impossible to determine whose blade was whose. She hesitated for only a moment as she watched them battle furiously before throwing herself down the steps away from the throne. Vader could handle Palpatine, she told herself, but she couldn't shake the sense of guilt. The hissing sound of flashing lightsabers chased her down the stairs, interspersed by the echoing mechanical breathing. The Force suddenly flared in alarm, much as it had on Geonosis. This time, however, she wasn't immersed in a Force-enhanced state, and unable to control it, it nearly whitewashed all her senses. She stumbled. Instantly, she was snatched up by a strong arm, yanking her away from the swipe of a scintillating blade. Vader released her behind him as he continued to deflect Palpatine's barrage of attacks. The Emperor drove at Vader in murderous glee. In a straightforward lightsaber duel, his now ex-apprentice had the edge considering Palpatine's advancing age, but the Sith Master was free to attack without any concern over whom he injured. Vader, on the other hand, had the distinct disadvantage of wanting to protect Leia. Palpatine's onslaught of jabs and fates and slashing and hacking forced Vader off at an angle. For a moment, she saw Palpatine out of the corner of her eyes, raising his hand, blue lightning forking out towards her. A mass of black flew in, blocking her view. There was a horrible screeching. It took her a moment to realize that Vader was blocking the lightning with his lightsaber. She stared in astonishment at the back of his helmet. Time and again, he came to her defense, protecting her. just a little, her obstinate resentment began to crack.
You old fool, Sidious snarled over the ringing crackling. Your family always was your greatest weakness.
They give me strength the likes of which you'll never know, Sidious,
Vader rumbled back.
The Force lightning abruptly ceased, making Vader almost stagger forwards. Palpatine fainted high before throwing a vicious series of low attacks, knowing the substandard prosthetics would cope poorly. Vader surprised him with his dexterity, however, as he easily dropped low to block them before bearing down on Sidious, using his height advantage as he drove the Emperor away from his daughter.
Go, Leia!
For just a moment, Leia hesitated before she started running for the elevator shaft again, but this time she had an entirely different purpose. Her urge to run had transformed into a resolve to assist Vader. The first squad of stormtroopers to cross her path was about to be divulged of their weapons. The proof of Vader having improved his prosthetics behind his back angered Sidious, and the dark side flurried of response, concealing his intent behind a flurry of attacks. Sidious burst out with the Force. Leia heard a pained grunt and a crash of something heavy hitting the deck, but she didn't risk a glance backward as she sprinted towards the open elevator doors. 2 steps later, however, her whole body became a sea of pain as she was sent hurtling through the air. She screamed as the Force lightning tore into her. Anakin had never seen anything so horrifying in his life as the sight of that blue lightning running over his daughter. No! Anakin sprang off the floor and threw himself towards Palpatine. Precisely as Sidious had intended, Vader's distraction cost him. The torrent of lightning turned on Anakin, and he was thrown backwards, landing close to Leia. The air was knocked from his lungs. His every fiber screamed in agony. This was no controlled punishment to teach his wayward apprentice a lesson. Sidious let loose with only one intent: to kill Darth Vader. He aimed specifically at the mechanical breathing equipment, and he aimed for living tissue. His entire fury focused on extinguishing life.
Rankin's warning came over the comm from Home 1. Incoming! 5 squadrons of TIE defenders, .06! Cyanide gripped his controls harder. We'll squash those pesky bugs! Second that, Green Leader! Farrell chirped in as he and Num continued to dodge and fire at the defenders already on their tail. Cosmos and Sanctuary, 2 of the new Nebulon B frigates courtesy of Vader, spared some artillery from their bombardment of the surrounding Star Destroyers and hailed a spray of turbo lasers with the incoming TIE defenders. A handful exploded and several were spent spinning out of control, but the majority nimbly dodged the heavy fire and clashed with the rebel ships. Akbar was keeping a close eye on the spread of the capital ships. The Alliance ships had spread through a large proportion of the Imperial Armada, but it still wasn't enough. Too many Star Destroyers weren't unoccupied for their plans to work. He quickly made his decision.
This is Akbar. Admiral Yamaris, Admiral Nemo, split the battlefield. Alliance fleet back up Liberty and Defiance. Engage those Star Destroyers.
The respirator quickly short-circuited. The vocalizer failed. Although it was muffled by the helmet and largely absorbed by the roaring, sizzling of the Force lightning, nonetheless, Leia heard his screams. It was his real voice, his vocal cords splitting in unspeakable pain. It was a sound that would haunt her for the rest of her life, a sound that now pierced through her years of accumulated hatred as nothing else could. There's a man inside that suit, she realized, once mutated and enthralled by the dark side, but it was her father, hidden behind that terrifying mask. Anakin didn't hear Leia shouting at Palpatine to stop, didn't see her run at the Sith Master only to be sent hurtling back again as he repelled her with an auxiliary dose of lightning. It is said that in the moment before death, one's life flashes before your eyes. But that wasn't what Anakin saw as his strength and hope rapidly deteriorated under the relentless onslaught of lightning. What filled his vision were images of Padme giving birth and her ensuing death, the baby girl being held by Bail Organa, and Obi-Wan taking the boy to Tatooine. The total separation of his family, the lost years of all that could have been. Lucid and vivid, the Force showed him the true price exacted for his fall to the dark side. Tears streamed down his face, but whether from the lightning or the Force visions, he didn't know. Then, amidst the all-encompassing agony, the Force granted its chosen one more chance, one possible chance to survive. It had been his driving force for so many years, a formidable power ingrained in the very fiber of his being, still an integral part of him that had refused to be banished even as he had been reborn as Anakin Skywalker. But now, as he raced towards death's door, as the Force bond to his former master stretched and frayed, then snapped altogether, at long last, the dark side relinquished Anakin, and the Force reverberated with the death of Darth Vader.